This heat is fading fast, but what builds behind it has everyone worried. And the timing of exactly how that fade happens is turning out to be almost as dangerous as the heat itself. Forecasters across the eastern United States have been promising a genuine big change in the weather pattern as the calendar flips into August. And for millions of people exhausted by weeks of oppressive heat, that shift finally appears to be arriving. But meteorologists tracking the transition are quick to point out that the road to relief runs directly through one more dangerous stretch of severe weather, and what settles in afterward may not represent the lasting break people are hoping for. AccuWeather meteorologist Elizabeth Danko described the coming shift plainly, explaining that a genuine change in the weather pattern will arrive across the Northeast right around the time August begins. For a region that has endured a dangerous and prolonged heat wave stretching across the central and eastern United States, that kind of forecast reads like welcome news on its surface. The National Weather Service confirmed that temperatures by the coming weekend would run 5 to 10 degrees below normal across the east, with the Plains states seeing an even larger swing, 10 to 15 degrees below average, pushing highs back into the 70s as far south as Kansas and the Oklahoma Panhandle. Weather.com. Meteorologist Caitlin Kaiser added that cooler than average temperatures are expected to persist across much of the Great Lakes, Midwest, and Northeast well into the first week of August, suggesting this would not be a fleeting single-day reprieve, but a more sustained break from the heat that has already defined so much of this summer. That relief, though, comes with a serious catch attached directly to the front end of the transition itself. Before the cooler air fully arrives, meteorologist Musi Kabedi warned that the existing weather pattern would continue generating a dangerous and prolonged heat wave across the central and eastern United States, right up until the shift takes hold, meaning millions of people would have to contend with high humidity and the genuine risk of flooding downpours before conditions actually improve. Danko specifically flagged the potential for drenching thunderstorms capable of producing reduced visibility, ponding on roadways, and slowed travel, alongside a real risk of locally damaging wind gusts and dangerous lightning strikes as this final push of heat collides with the incoming cooler air mass. In other words, the exact moment many people have been waiting for as their signal that summer's worst heat is finally breaking is also the moment forecasters warn carries some of the most immediate severe weather risk of the entire transition. If you're finding this breakdown genuinely useful, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because understanding what typically follows a transition like this one reveals why forecasters remain cautious even once the immediate severe weather risk has passed. Once that transitional stretch of storms clears and the promised cool down finally settles in, the question becomes exactly how long that relief actually lasts. And the broader seasonal outlook suggests the answer may be considerably shorter than people would like. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's August 2026 outlook, released by the Climate Prediction Center in mid-July, much of the eastern and south-central United States should still expect an overall hot month once the immediate transitional cooldown passes through. The southern plains specifically lean warm in that outlook, carrying roughly a 40% chance of above-normal temperatures, a pattern the Climate Prediction Center notes tracks closely with what typically occurs across that region during past El Niño years. A smaller, but still notable chance of continued heat, running between 33 and 50%, stretches all the way up the east coast as well, suggesting the cooler stretch currently arriving may prove to be more of an interruption than a genuine seasonal turning point. Out west, the pattern tells a somewhat different story, though one that carries its own specific set of concerns. The Pacific Northwest and the California coast both carry a modest above-normal temperature signal in the same NOAA outlook, even though forecasters kept those specific numbers relatively conservative given that cooler ocean water off both coastlines has been working against the broader warming trend elsewhere. Meanwhile, the interior west is expected to see a genuine boost in monsoon moisture as August progresses, a shift that offers real potential benefit for drought-stricken regions, but also introduces its own separate risk of flash flooding and lightning, sparked wildfires, particularly across terrain already stressed by weeks of extreme heat and dry conditions earlier in the summer. The one region bucking this broader trend toward continued heat sits across the northern plains, where forecasters give a 33 to 40% chance of below normal temperatures for August, a call that leans on cooler historical patterns tied to previous El Niño years. That regional exception illustrates something important about how this kind of large-scale climate pattern actually plays out in practice, producing meaningfully different outcomes across different parts of the same country simultaneously, rather than delivering one uniform type of weather nationwide. Forecasters have also noted that a stalled Madden-Julian oscillation, a wave of tropical rainfall and wind that circles the entire globe, along with shifting patterns in the Arctic Oscillation, North Atlantic Oscillation, and Pacific North American Index, all factored into this outlook alongside El Niño itself, even though the El Nino signal carried the most overall weight in shaping the final forecast. Europe's version of the same transition carries its own distinct warnings worth understanding, given how closely this summer's European heat has tracked alongside events unfolding across North America. Detailed regional forecasting suggests that Central and Eastern Europe, having largely escaped the most extreme heat during July, could see conditions similar to the intense heat recorded in late June return through the first half of August, before that heat potentially eases during the second half of the month as its core shifts back toward France. Persistent heat waves throughout the summer have already caused drought to spread and intensify across much of the continent, including England and Wales. Specifically, meaning any renewed stretch of heat arriving on top of soil already parched from previous events carries meaningfully elevated risk compared to an equivalent heat event striking earlier in the season before drought conditions had fully taken hold. Canada's own transition mirrors this same underlying pattern of shifting extremes rather than a clean, lasting resolution. Despite an already exceptionally busy and wet summer, with July ranking as the wettest month on record in Ottawa and steady downpours securing the wettest summer on record over in Edmonton, forecasters expect a familiar and considerably drier summertime pattern to re-emerge across the country as August progresses. Hot temperatures and dry conditions are expected to become a renewed concern for regions already hit hard by wildfires earlier this year, illustrating how quickly a wet, stormy stretch can give way to renewed fire risk once drier, hotter conditions return, particularly given how much vegetation growth the earlier rainfall likely encouraged. Growth that can ultimately increase available wildfire fuel once it dries out again. Underlying all of these regional variations sits the same broader driver responsible for so much of this year's weather volatility, a rapidly strengthening El Nino continuing its development in the tropical Pacific Ocean. Weekly sea surface temperatures in the benchmark Nino 3.4 monitoring region have been running roughly 1.3 degrees Celsius above normal, placing the current event at moderate strength for now, even as forecasters widely expect it to continue intensifying considerably further as the year progresses. Climate researchers tracking this event note that if it continues accelerating towards super El Nino territory by autumn, global temperature records could fall not just later this year, but especially throughout 2027, given the well-documented tendency for El Nino's fullest warming influence to arrive roughly a year after the event itself first develops. Public health messaging has faced a genuinely difficult challenge throughout this particular transition, given how quickly conditions are expected to swing from dangerous heat directly into severe thunderstorms, before finally settling into cooler air. Health officials across the affected corridor have had to communicate multiple, distinct safety messages within the span of just a few days, first urging continued heat safety precautions as the final push of extreme warmth arrives, then pivoting towards severe thunderstorm safety guidance as the transitional storms move through, and finally shifting attention toward the specific regional outlook for the weeks following the immediate cooldown. That rapid sequence of shifting priorities places considerably more strain on public communication efforts than a more gradual, single-phase transition would typically require, since residents must adjust their behavior and precautions multiple times within a relatively compressed window. Energy providers across the affected regions have similarly had to plan around this multi-phase transition rather than a simple single-directional shift in demand. Air conditioning usage typically remains elevated right up until the moment cooler air actually arrives, meaning grid operators must continue managing peak demand even as forecasters publicly discuss an incoming cooldown, since the public messaging around relief inevitably arrives somewhat ahead of the actual temperature drop itself. Once the cooler air does settle in, utilities then face the opposite challenge of managing a rapid drop in demand, followed by the likelihood of renewed demand increases. Once the broader August outlook's warmer than average conditions reassert themselves across much of the eastern and south central United States in the weeks following this initial transitional cooldown, agricultural regions across the affected corridor face their own complicated calculus, tied to this transition as well. Crops stressed by weeks of extreme heat could genuinely benefit from both the transitional rainfall and the following cooler stretch, provided that rainfall arrives gradually enough to soak into hardened, heat-baked soil rather than running off rapidly during the kind of intense downpours forecasters have specifically warned about. Farmers across the southern plains, where NOAA's broader August outlook favors a continuation of above normal temperatures once the immediate transition passes, face a narrower window to capitalize on whatever benefit this temporary cooldown provides before warmer, drier conditions potentially reassert themselves for the remainder of the month. Transportation networks have already begun adjusting to the specific hazards this transition introduces at each of its distinct phases. Airlines operating throughout the affected corridor have had to account for both the reduced aircraft performance associated with the final push of extreme heat and the separate risk of delays tied to the severe thunderstorms marking the transition itself, a combination that can compound scheduling disruptions considerably more than either hazard would produce in isolation. Highway departments across affected states have likewise had to prepare for the specific combination of heat-related pavement concerns, giving way rapidly to flooding and reduced visibility concerns as the transitional storms move through, requiring emergency crews to remain ready for two distinct categories of weather-related road hazards within a very short window of time. Water. Resource managers across regions expecting renewed monsoon activity as part of the broader August pattern shift have expressed a similarly complicated mix of optimism and caution about what the coming weeks might bring. Genuine drought relief remains possible if the anticipated monsoon moisture arrives in a gradual, sustained pattern rather than concentrated into a small number of intense storm events, but water. Managers are quick to note that the same hardened, heat-stressed soil left behind by weeks of extreme heat makes the region considerably more vulnerable to flash flooding than it would be during a monsoon season following a more typical, less extreme summer heat pattern. It is the recognition that a fading heat wave, however genuine the relief feels in the moment, rarely represents a clean, lasting resolution to the broader seasonal pattern responsible for producing it. The same severe thunderstorms marking the front edge of this transition, the same regional variation in NOAA's broader August outlook, and the same rapidly strengthening El Niño driving conditions across multiple continents simultaneously all point toward continued volatility rather than a simple, lasting return to calm, late summer weather. If this breakdown of exactly why forecasters remain cautious, even as this current heat finally breaks, helped clarify what genuinely worries meteorologists about the weeks just ahead, make sure you are subscribed, because with El Niño still strengthening and regional patterns still shifting in different directions across the globe, there's a very real chance this current relief proves considerably more temporary than most people currently expect.